So hello everybody, and let's get to our daily wrap-up headlines. The District Court of The Hague has sentenced 3 Russian servicemen to life imprisonment for the downing of Malaysian Boeing Flight MH17. For more than 8 years, the Russian talked about the fact that not everything is so clear. However, the International Court came to the decision it was the Russian missile complex, the Russian missile, and organized from Russia, and the Russian military were involved. The only detail about Ukraine, the territory from which the missile was launched. But it was captured in July 2014. I note that there were 4 suspects and only 3 were found guilty for the shooting down of the Boeing. I think that Oleg Pulatov was acquitted, and only because they didn't collect enough evidence that he could somehow influence the launch of the missile. He did not accompany the book from Russia, didn't send it back. So there's no evidence that Pulatov's actions significantly influenced the movement and launched the book. But 3 Russian soldiers, Igor Girkin-Strelkov, Sergei Dubinsky and Leonid Kharchenko, were sentenced to life imprisonment. Of course, they will not go to prison because Russia will not extradite its citizens to serve their sentence. And the question is not in factual imprisoning them, but in the fact that they can tell a lot. It means nothing for the Russians to exchange one of the witnesses to the downing of the plane, Volodymyr Tsemach, for Ukrainians captured by Russia. Among them was, in particular, director Oleg Sentsov and 24 Ukrainian sailors who were captured in violation of international maritime treaties. The Russians have never shied away from capturing a few people. You can exchange them for someone important or just make fun of them when you are in a bad mood. Currently, the Russians have 14 days to appeal the decision, but I don't think they will do it. Why should they? Back in 2015, the Russian Constitutional Court recognized that the Kremlin may not implement international treaties if they conflict with domestic laws. Although, here it would probably be more accurate to say according to internal desires. But the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs believes that the court's decision is a landmark event on the way to establishing justice and ensuring the inevitability of punishment for committed crimes. It became possible thanks to the long and painstaking work of dozens of investigators and prosecutors of the International Joint Investigation Group, of which Ukraine is an active participant. Russia refused to send its representatives to this group. It called both the international investigation, which began 2 weeks after the disaster, and the trial, which began in March 2020, politicized and biased. Of course, it didn't participate because now it can be said that this is all an falsification. Not such a falsification as the research by the Almaz Altay company, where they tried to prove that the missile launch was from the territory controlled by Ukraine. It doesn't matter that their theory violated the laws of physics and geography. Russia has also another way out to use the immunity of combatants in an international conflict, but for this, Moscow must recognize itself as a participant in the war since 2014. And we have already repeatedly heard that they are not there. Ukraine now hopes that the verdicts announced will show that those who made the decision and gave the order to shoot down the passenger liner will eventually be brought to justice. And in addition to individual responsibility, the Russian Federation as a state will also be punished for shooting down MH17. Let's hope for that too, because since July 2014, Russia has already violated so much that at least our children had time to investigate it all. So let's get to another top news, terror, but now in Mariupol. After the Russians left Kherson and saw how the local citizens met Ukrainian armed forces, the occupiers decided to take revenge on the civilians of other occupied cities. Mariupol is currently under attack the most. Satellite images showed that almost 5,000 fresh graves appeared at the old Crimea cemetery since the beginning of the attack. 1,500 of them during the fall. Currently, the Russians are planning to demolish almost 1,500 houses in the city. The occupiers say that the buildings cannot be restored. And the question is, who fired at them? Who attacked Ukraine? Not the Russians themselves. And knowing their brutality after the shots from Bucha, Irpin, Izum, and now Kherson, I'm sure that they are torturing and killing people in Mariupol as well. And now they cover the tracks, they are hiding evidences and destroying houses. Do not restore utility networks. No, no, no. Since the capture, they have been carrying mobile televisions with their propaganda around the city. Instead, local people who remain in the city must stand in the choirs for basic products, cook food on bonfires in the yards, and think about how to get fresh water. I don't even want to imagine what people will do in winter. Moreover, if at the beginning Russians demolished houses where it's impossible to live, now they're planning to dismantle buildings where one entrance survived and two burned down. What will happen to those people who continue to live in the surviving entrance is unclear. The fact is that when it comes to what to do with the people and where they should go, the occupying power pretends that they do not exist at all. In general, the Russians plan to demolish about 1,000 buildings. Let me remind you that earlier, the occupiers themselves declared that they would not be able to restore the city until winter. Now they're thinking about what to do with the people who did remain. But I think they already have a plan, just to take people out. I won't be surprised if somewhere in Siberia or elsewhere. Russians know a lot about deporting people. And instead of the people who left, they can bring Russians who will shout that the Azov region has always been Russian territory. The Russians also did it when, in the 1930s, they brought people to villages and cities that were dying due to Holodomor. Therefore, Ukrainians already know how they will act. At the same time, we are receiving positive information from Mariupol. The stories of the liberation of Izum and Kherson inspire people in other occupied cities, and they are now waiting even more for Ukrainian soldiers. Let's hope that they will wait and not be destroyed by terrorist country. So now let's talk about terrorism itself. The next point is about what's going to be next week. And next week, the European Parliament may agree a resolution recognizing the Federation as a state sponsor of terrorism. The day before, the political groups of the European Parliament agreed on the text of such a resolution. As Deputy Andrius Kubilius reported, the negotiations lasted 4 hours. And the main point of the resolution reads as follows. The European Parliament recognizes Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism and a state that uses terrorist means. So we are waiting for the decision next week. Let me remind you, the next meeting in Strasbourg will be held from Monday to Thursday. Watch live information from there and on our air. Let me as well remind you that parliaments have already made similar decisions. On October 13, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution recognizing the Russian regime as a terrorist for the first time. On October 18th, the Parliament of Estonia recognized the ruling regime in the Russian Federation as a terrorist regime. On October 26th, the Polish Senate recognized the authorized of the Russian Federation as a terrorist regime. In the Czech Republic, deputies recognized the current Russian regime as terrorist. And recently, Volodymyr Zelensky called on all countries of the world to recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. If such a decision is adopted, then Russia will stand in line with North Korea, Syria, Iran, excellent partners. By the way, Ukrainians have a lot of questions about Iran. Not only do they supply their drones to Russia, and now we are sitting without electricity, but about economic cooperation between Iran and Hungary. The Host leader, Viktor Orban, has been friends with Putin for a long time and is trying in every way to protect the Kremlin's interests in Europe. It is for nothing that in September, the majority of the members of the European Parliament condemned the attempts of Viktor Orban's government to undermine the foundations of democracy in Hungary. The European Parliament's reporter on the situation in Hungary, Gwendolyn Delbo-Caulfield, said it was more urgent than ever for the Parliament to take such a position, given the alarming pace at which the rule of law is retreating in Hungary. Also, large-scale corruption in this country. I can't be sure about corruption, but this side in the Ukrainian-Russian war in Budapest was definitely chosen wrong. After all, cooperation is possible and profitable. And how can you communicate with a country that shut down a peaceful liner and didn't get any punishment for it? And I'm not talking about Flight MH17, but about the downing of a Ukrainian Boeing 737 near Tehran in January 2020. Let's follow the news. Stay with us. Thank you.